Hello, good morning. This is Dr. Iftikhar Ahmed Ansari, Department of Political Science, Aligarh Muslim University, AMU. Today we are going to talk about nature of state. Now when we talk about nature of state differs from different time period, and we need to take into cognizance the nature of state at those different periods of time and how the present nature has come in front of us, what has been the evolution, and during that process we'll be understanding what had been its nature in different periods of time. So let's start. Basically, the state in the form of political power, it has existed from times immemorial, and the written records that we have in the form of the Greek polis, that is the city-states, they were the first form of states. Before city-states, they were tribal states, but city-states cannot be termed as states as they were city communities. MacIver writes that Greek political thinkers were at loss because in Greek there was no word corresponding to the modern term state. It is only the city, the polis, of which he could speak, and we are very apt to misinterpret his meaning when we translate it as state. So it is the city community, not our state, to which he attributed those all-comprehensive functions and power. So the early Greek city-states do not come under the present meaning of the state. After the Greek city-states, the Roman Empire arose out of the ruins of city-states, and this was smashed by Teutonic conquerors, and they established feudal states in Europe. So feudal states changed into church states, which were neither sovereign nor powerful. So both the Roman Empire and feudal state they fell short of our understanding of the concept of state in modern times. And out of the womb of this feudal order has emerged the modern notion of national territorial state as a unifying law and order and justice maintaining social agency. So various views of the state have emerged, and so great and obvious a fact as the state has been the object of quite conflicting definitions. And MacIver has summarized different notions of the state as follows. He says it's a class organization, it gives the organization of the whole community, power system, welfare system, legal institution, nation, mutual insurance, the very basis of life agency, necessary evil, unnecessary evil, corporation, march of God on earth. I mean, these were the different terms which are given to the concept of state in different period of time. Thus, many views of the state have emerged, and these views emphasize on one or the other notion of the state, and that depicts the nature of the state itself. So, state is an association of society which serves its purpose at their very phase of its historical development. Society has emerged from time to time, so has the state. So, state is thus is a historic entity. History means an account of socio-economic and political conditions in a particular time and period and particular form. So changes in the material conditions of society and its class structure led to changes in the notion of the state. Even a liberal writer like MacIver says the state is an agency of human purpose, and its character changes as it is directed more to the interest of this or that class within the community, as it serves more this or that set of aims as its area or purpose narrow or widens. Thus, the state is an agency of and for society. It has not remained static. According to liberal writers, its notion have changed with the change in human intentions and social requirements. Marxism maintains that with the change in the material condition and class structure of society, the state is bound to change. So, the notion of the state has changed from time to time. Because of this, the state can only be understood historically. It should not be understood as a legal order alone. Though the modern state emerged only in the 16th century, and Machiavelli was the first thinker to use the concept in the present sense of the term, the state, and state in the political order has existed from the time immemorial, and various thinkers beginning from Greek philosophers Plato and Aristotle have given their views on political order. The Western intellectual tradition begins with Plato and Aristotle about 2,400 years ago. Since then, during the course of evolution of the Western political philosophy, some categorization have emerged, and that is what we are going to follow in our today's presentation. So my presentation will be in two parts. about the nature of the state. First part will focus on the ancient political thought and the medieval political thought. And the second, which will be in a different lecture, that will be in the form of the modern political thought, that is from 16th century onward, will be tracing the nature of state. So, categorization wise, ancient political thought, then medieval political thought, in that we will find the church and the state notion, and modern political thought, that is from 16th century onwards to the present, we will find the notion of state as a sovereign state, state as man-made artificial institution, then liberal individual notion of the state as necessary evil, then anarchist notion of the state as unnecessary evil, then totalitarian notion, plural notion of the state and its nature, and then Marxist notion of the state as a class instrument, and finally the contemporary liberal notion of state as a welfare state. Now coming to the very first ancient understanding of the nature of state, and that is the ethical notion. So ethical notion of the state, the founding fathers of Western philosophy, Plato and Aristotle, supported this notion and maintained that the state is the first and foremost condition of virtuous life. It is the highest moral order, a supreme, all-comprehensive, all-powerful and all-embracing situation. Without state, they believe that human beings cannot be there, as state inculcates humanity in the human beings and makes them man itself. So Aristotle maintained that the state is a prior to man because it is the state by virtue of which a being becomes man. So Greek philosophers made no distinction between the state and society, since during the Greek period, city-states there, and these city-states had small territory and population. The ethical notion of the state regards state as an end in itself because it's self-perfect and it's self-fulfilling, and it can achieve, and this can be achieved through state alone. So state is the highest morality, it's necessary for intellectual, moral and material development of man. So state has a majestic real personality of its own, which is superior and independent of individual. And in that ancient perspective, the nature of state, according to Aristotle, the state is natural rather than man-made institution. Before the views of modern supporters of the ethical notion of state are discussed, it would be appropriate to give a brief account of what Greek city-states, independent states were. So these were independent and self-governed small states having different forms of governments: oligarchy, aristocracy, monarchy, tyranny, democracy. Different forms of government were in operation. So Athens, a democracy, and Sparta, an aristocracy, were the most prominent city-states. Citizens were there, but they were limited in number. It was not available to a large number of population. About 90% of slaves and aliens were deprived of citizenship. About citizenship, McIver says that it was a function, almost a profession in that ancient city-state. The life of the citizen was the life of the city. His good was, in ideal, wholly identified with that of the commonwealth. There were two main classes in city-states: masters and slaves. And further, McIver writes, as for slavery, it was the foundation of the economy of ancient city community, but the foundation was unsound. In the Greek city-states, no distinction was made between the state and society. As McIver further writes, the failure to distinguish the state from the community left Athenians' liberty itself a monument broken and defaced, because the life of the citizen in city-state was very active, but there was a complete and over-encompassing interference or intervention of state in every aspect of life. So Burke, his phrase will be apt here when he says a partnership. Their life was a partnership, and it was a partnership in all the sciences, a partnership in all art, a partnership in every virtue and in all perfection. So to come to the salient feature of that state, which was ethical in nature, we find that the Greek political scene emerged the Athenian notion of the state, and it had a slave owners, the state being the instrument of minority of slave owners, that is the citizens, was portrayed as the highest ethical institution, partly to maintain unity among the ruling class and partly for the sake of ideological domination over the slaves. In view of the rich social life which the ideal citizen practiced, could afford and call themselves ideal citizens, no difference was made by the Greek philosophers between individuals. The state, the society, and the state was given paramount say over all the affairs of the individual's life. This gave birth to idealist school of Western philosophy later on in modern period. However, the ethical notion did not remain confined to the Greek philosophers alone. In the modern period, many idealist and neo-idealist political philosophers like Rousseau, Kant, Hegel, Green, Bradley, Bosanq, they have supported the ideal conception of state as an ethical institution. In Hegel's philosophy, this ethical notion of the state virtually becomes an absolute totalitarian notion of the state. So in conclusion, we can say that the ethical state was something over and above the individual, groups and associations and people, and the state is a manifestation. It was a majestic being and the highest order and the march of God on earth. So individuals are not allowed to have any rights and personal spheres against the state, and the state is regarded as an end in itself rather than a means for moral and intellectual development of man. This notion may have been appropriate in Greek period because of the material conditions of the small communities, but in the modern period it has provided foundation to the totalitarian notion of the state. The organic theory of the state is also based on this very ethical nature of the state. Now moving on to its further development from ethical to legal notion. In the ancient times, the Roman Empire especially emerged by merging the small city-states of the Greek world and establishing a unity, uniform law and order, strong administration and a despotic political system. Now it gave birth to the legal notion of the state, as state was viewed as the highest lawmaking power. Laws have universal character, and these were applicable to both the governors and the governed. Roman Empire gave birth to Roman law, which is the basis of legal system of the world even today. So what Rome in the first stage achieved was a political unity, which was based on a metropolitan citizenship, an achievement unknown in Greek or even in the world until Romans' day. So absence of unity was the great weakness of the Greek city-states, and unity was the strength of the Roman Empire. So according to Gettel, Greece had developed democracy without unity. Rome secured unity without democracy. He further writes, Rome taught the world that a large state might be stable and successfully governed. However, the Roman Empire did not emerge in a day. The Roman state passed through three phases of development. Initially, it was like its Greek counterpart city-state. The second stage was that of republic. During the third stage, it was an empire. So the first two stages were replaced by the third by the close of the 1st century BC, and successful Roman commanders, Caesar, Augustus, Sulla, Marius, established bureaucratic and despotic empires with the concentration of authority, uniformity of law, then limited participation of citizenships, and citizenship without participation in political affairs. Now, all the despotic institutions at the time and all the democratic institutions were made powerless by these popular military commanders who established the glorious Roman Empire with their military power and skill. Solto writes, Rome may be said to have taught later dictators the way to establish tyranny, not by the outright destruction of free institutions, thus creating conflict, opposition and resistance, but gradually and secretly emptying them of all effective powers while respecting their outward forms. A lesson well learned by two Napoleons, by Mussolini, by Hitler later on in our contemporary history, and the Roman Empire nursed political ideas like unity, order, law, discipline, strength, cosmopolitanism, etc. Their most important contribution to politics has been the establishment of a universal code of law. And further, they also taught the world that large states are much better than smaller states because these can provide stability, peace, order, and good governance. Liberty of the citizens in Rome was sacrificed for the sake of the stable political system. In order to govern the empire, they could develop a sound aristocratic administration with almost soulless efficiency. Sovereignty and citizenship were worked out by Romans, and a method of binding divergent nations into political unity have never been surpassed. So the maintenance of peace for centuries within the civilized world was a great boon to mankind. So Roman politics was not idealistic, as the Romans were practical, skillful and ambitious in their political practice. So the Romans were concerned with the art of government more than with the end, and their political problems were administrative, purpose of the state legal rather than ethical. The philosophers of the Roman period, Polybius, Cicero, both of them concentrated on the art of governing and lawmaking. So Roman Empire established about 2100 years ago and lasted for about 500 years ago with all its despotism and cruelty. So at that time, the class structure of the Roman society was almost the same as that of the Greeks, city-states, masters and slaves. However, class struggle between masters and slaves were more fierce in the Roman period, and the Great Slave Revolution, in which Spartacus organized a revolt against the Roman Empire, which shocked the whole empire. But the revolution was mercilessly crushed, and the liberation of the slave was postponed for some time. After the failure, this slave revolution, particularly, which brought about instability in the whole empire. And in the 4th century, the Roman Empire became very weak because of the rise of the tide of slave unrest and corruption of officials, dictatorial regimes of the emperors, and the advent of Christianity and the lack of liberty and equality. Rome increasingly depended on the army, and its authority was based purely on power. So in the 4th century Roman Empire, Constantine made a compromise with the Christianity by declaring it the state religion and established church-state. With it began the medieval period in the Western world, and with that downfall of Rome, the state actually disappeared from the Western Europe. The legal notion of the state that we are talking about, the nature of the state and its legal notion, again emerged in the modern period. The emerging bourgeois, having established strong monarchic sovereign states, were not satisfied with this alone. They wanted to establish the state on a legal basis and make it a legal institution to protect rights, maintain law and order, and to establish peace and security of property. Now, this took the form of a struggle for parliamentary supremacy against the personal autocracy of kings. Parliaments regarded as superior and supreme lawmaking power. The Revolution of 1649 and 1688 declared Parliament's victories and established parliamentary supremacy in England. Now, during that period, the state was regarded as the supreme law-making institution with an object of serving the common interest by maintaining order and an individual's right to personal liberty and private property. In that period, lawmaking state meant Parliament, as Parliament had the power of making laws. Gradually, the bourgeois captured Parliament and the lawmaking power came in their hands. Now, this legal notion of the state was primarily a negative nature of the state, because law was either be preventive or commanding. Now, through law, the state can make the individuals to do or not to do something. So, as the state is above law, these cannot bind the state to do something. Thus, this legal notion of the state makes it a negative or police state whose main task is to maintain a law and order. Now, this view of state has found expression in the writings of Bodin, Hobbes, Bentham and Austin. So, the legal notion of state is still prevalent in one form or the other. According to this view, state is a law-making power. Laws are the command of the sovereign, that is the state, and the state has got coercive power, which is known as sovereignty of the state. With the law-making power in the hands, the state, there emerged universality and universal law in national states. Positive laws made by the state overshadowed the natural, moral, divine laws, social customs and tradition. However, it was expected that state would consider these while framing laws. Thus, this legal notion of the state regarded the state as an unrestricted supreme power, form king law. Obedience to these laws being the duty of every citizen. In this way, the state becomes an institution above society and law, the master of the law and maintainer of justice and order. Now, with the development of democratic ideas, it was urged that laws should be made by people or their representatives. This gave rise to democratic laws and democratic state. The legal notion of the state gave birth to legalistic democracy. The notion of legal sovereignty, rights, equality, liberty, and justice are associated with the legal notion of the state. So, law is not the totality of politics and political processes. Legal notion of the state developed in the Rome period and reinforced in the modern period emphasized only the legal dimension of the state. Politics and other political concepts were neglected. So, a mere legal understanding of these notions makes it difficult to get the political meaning of these. So, with this notion of the state, it's difficult to understand the political system itself. Similarly, with this notion of democracy, democracy as a political system cannot be understood. Sovereignty, rights, equality, liberty, and justice also cannot be understood politically with legalistic outlook. Law can help us in understanding social realities, but law is not the only basis of politics and political process. A purely legal notion of the state and other concepts have made the study of politics narrow, and this limitation will be apparent in the discussion we'll be talking later on sovereignty, rights, liberty, equality, justice. So law can help us in understanding social realities, but law is not the only basis of political and political process, a purely legal notion it is. So circumstances cannot be understood on a legal basis alone, and law is a poor dimension of the social process, whereas politics is much more important dimension of it. Thus, this legal notion of the state regards states to be a sovereign lawmaking power having four elements: population, definite territory, government, and sovereignty. But this view, as we have seen the discussion on the traditional view of the state, is insufficient for the political analysis. As a state is a social institution serving the interests of the society or a particular class in society by performing certain functions, the legal notion of the state makes it an abstract institution, merely a sovereign law making institution, and the study of politics becomes an abstract study of an abstract institution rather than a study of society and social process. Now, with that, we move on to the state-church notion of the state. Now, when there was mass unrest in the public against the dictatorial regimes of the Roman empires, and they were faced with the unprecedented crisis from within and without, Christianity became very popular among the masses and its progressive ideas. So, Christianity raised its voice against injustice and exploitation of the people. Roman emperors tried to crush Christianity, but no progressive ideology or movement can be suppressed by dictatorial powers for long. So in the 4th century, when due to its inner contradiction, the Roman Empire was declining and was moving towards complete destruction, it compromised with Christianity, and by this, it assimilated Christianity and turned this people enemy into an ally, an act of highest statesmanship on the part of the state. So thus, a partnership began between the Roman Empire and the Church, which created space, and it also provided peace and order in society for many time. Lipson writes, partnership between the cross and the eagle, that the state, that is eagle and cross, that is the church, began, they brought about gain and loss to both. The medieval period began with this partnership of the state and the church, quite progressive before this partnership, became a citadel of reaction, anti-progress and anti-people. Becoming an integral part of the established order, the church ceased to be a victim of persecution and was able henceforth to do the prosecuting job. Now, this teaches us a lesson that political power has a tremendous corrupting influence, and today's revolutionaries easily become the reactionaries of tomorrow. In this way, the Roman Empire could save itself from the inner dangers, but its inner weaknesses could not face the external attacks. So, in the 5th century, Teutonic people attacked the Roman Empire and destroyed it. Thus, Teutonic people have been termed as barbarians by the European historians, though these people used to love local independence and liberty, and they were much better than the Roman emperors in many respects. They had no idea of a strong central authority, and they emphasized individualism and opposed the Roman ideas of authority and centralization. Now, how could they be barbarians and inferior to Roman dictators? That is something to ponder. So, Roman Empire was torn into pieces by these conquerors, and on these pieces, and they brought together a new system, and that was a feudal system. So instead of a centralized authority of the Roman Empire, many political authorities emerged and unity was replaced by diversity. So in the disorder that resulted because of the fall of the Roman Empire, feudalism established order in its own way. So the Greco-Roman period, characterized by slave-master division of society, was replaced by the medieval feudalism, where society was divided into feudal lords and the serf, the slaves. They welcomed this new system. Exploitation of the masses continued in the new order, but the way of exploitation changed. So instead of slave owners, a new class, feudal lords, came on the scene as the exploiting class. So state in the feudal order, if we see its nature, we find that the Roman Empire, after its fall, was broken up into many parts. And these parts came under the control of many feudal lords, who established their authority over these. So politically, feudalism is simply governed by a territorial aristocracy filling the vacancy created by the collapse of any central power. So under feudalism, political authority went with land, and the individual's relation with the land determined his rights and duties. Sold to rights, it is this association of political power with land control that is the essential principle of what is commonly called the feudal system. So the whole hierarchy of political authority was built on the basis of ownership of land. Now the Supreme Lord distributed his land among the tenants in chief, who further subdivided it among the tenant, and the tenant further subdivided it against the serfs. In this way, the whole socio-economic structure was built, which provided basis to political authority. Now, in this system, the majority of the serf population used to work, and the fruits of the labor were shared by the exploiting class, supreme lords, tenant-in-chief, and big tenants. So the supreme lord or the king had an indirect authority over the people, and his authority was divided amongst the local feudal lords. In this way, authority was decentralized in the feudal system. So the concept of sovereign state was missing in the medieval period. That is what we find among the nature of state in that period, because there was hierarchy of political power based on the ownership of land. So the allegiance of the people was divided among the various authorities above them. There was no centralized or central law and order. Customs and traditions dominated society. So the main feature of feudal political system were absence of a centralized power. Instead of imperial unity, there was hierarchy. Then allegiance of people was divided. There was no centralized law, and the community was ruled by customs and traditions. Political authority was built on the ownership of land. Society was divided into feudal lords and serfs. There was neither unity nor liberty in such a society, and inequalities by birth were well accepted. So the church and the state that we are talking about, the first important feature of the medieval period was feudalism, and the second was the power of the church. The institution of Christian society and the Christian church survived the fall of the Roman Empire, and the Holy Roman Empire built its authority on the Roman imperial model. And when Europe fell into pieces, it was able to provide a centralized authority and order. So the religion dominates the mentality of the medieval ages to a degree unparalleled in the history of Western civilization before and since. So the church derived its strength from the absence of strong government and the power of the religious ideas over the minds of the people. In the name of religion, the church mustered a good amount of power, wealth and prestige. Christianity taught the exploited class in the class-divided society that this world is nothing and prayer is a solution of all problems. Religion is the main thing, and so on. It diverted the attention of the people from exploitation by exploiting classes to spiritual welfares. As the church was serving the interest of the ruling classes, it was popular among the members of this class, and they adopted Christianity. So the power of the church went on increasing, and it started interfering in temporal affairs like collection of taxes, maintenance of law and order, etc. The Pope, as head of the church, began to claim superiority over all the kings and princes and virtually became the state. The Christian philosophers like St. Augustus gave the notion the king should be under the power of the church. So because of the entry of the Almighty Church in politics, the problem of the relationship of the church and the state became the fundamental political issue of the age. This led to bitter conflicts between the church and the state. The whole of medieval political thought is devoted to this problem, and the interest of the Pope lay in having weak kings. So feudalism was the weakness of the kings, and in feudalism, the church had a final ally. The state, during its period, was crushed in between the two forces, from the top, the church, and from the below, feudalism. Now, during these dark ages, the general masses were badly exploited and were sleeping due to intoxication of the religion and were living in the hope of salvation in the next world. When the masses are passive, then the rulers start fighting among themselves. And the conflict of the king and the pope began in such circumstances, and the socio-economic and political structure of the medieval period may be seen in the following scheme, that we find exploited class was pope, many kings, many feudal lords, big landlords, and exploited class was general masses, serf, and small producers. So church and state conflict reached its final stage, and when the claim of the church for the supremacy led to the conflict between the church and the state, the church tried to limit the authority of the state and interfered in its internal matters. And the theory of the two swords, once given by Pope Gelasius, which maintained that God has given one sword to the Pope and to guide the spiritual affairs, and another to the king to run the temporal affairs, was no more acceptable to the church. The church maintained that the God has given both the swords to the Pope. And Pope, for his own convenience, handed over the temporal sword to the king. It meant that the king was not directly under God, but he was under the Pope, who had the sole agency to conduct all affairs of God. But there is no Chinese wall, you see, to separate the spiritual and temporal affairs. Now, there was an open conflict, an open fight between the church and the religious order, and the king, representing the secular order of the state. So the church fathers, reputedly believers in peace and non-violence, wearing white clothes, they mounted on white horses with cross around the neck and sword in the hand, accompanied by an army of ignorant religious people, rode out to battle fields to protect their power, wealth and prestige against the kings. So in the name of religion, peace and salvation, etc., Europe was drenched with the blood of the poor serfs and peasants who thought that they were fighting in defense of religion. At last the kings were victorious, and the eagle, the sign of the king, they swallowed the cross, the sign of the church, and in this way modern national sovereign secular states emerged in the Europe and European world by putting an end to the feudal decentralization authority and by finishing and finalizing the strength of the international order that was represented by the Pope. Now, in conclusion, what we find is that during the medieval period, that was approximately from 5th century to the 15th century, known as Dark Ages, there was no development of any knowledge, science, technology or state itself. The economy was feudal, in which poor peasants, serfs, small producers and craftsmen were badly exploited. Scientific knowledge was the enemy of the church, and its power, which was based on faith, the life of the man was sacrificed on the myth of a life in the other world. In the 16th century, great scientist Bruno was burnt in Rome simply because he discovered some scientific facts which were against the views held by the church. Now, during the whole of the medieval period, the state remained very weak, and there was no concept of sovereignty of the state. The Dark Ages were really dark for the state and its sovereignty, and the church and the state, if we say here in the relation, state was weak and it had no sovereign power, and political power was divided amongst the feudal lords and papacy. This led to conflicts and chaos. Moreover, the state was not secular. Religion dominated all aspects of social life and hindered the development of scientific thinking. Now, with that, we come to the end of the first part of the nature of state. I will continue the discussion in a modern age in my second presentation. So long. Thank you.